Well, good evening. I hope that I am on. going to do something a little bit different. My camera is not working for some particular reason, so we're going to try to do it without it. But you can still see the PowerPoint. And this is brought to you by North Columbus Church of Christ, located in Columbus, Mississippi. And you can find out more about us on our website, northcolumbuschristians.com. We also have a YouTube channel, North Columbus Church of Christ. You can find us there as well. And so I'm going to do something a little bit different. And I'm going to talk about the time between the Old and the New Testament. And so, those that are not very familiar with Bible history, there was approximately 400 years between really the last book in the Old Testament, that being Malachi, and the beginning of the New Testament. And so, we're going to talk about that. And really, I think the main point, or the main reason rather, that I would like to talk about that is the referencing back to the prophecy in Daniel chapter 2. And there was a prophecy there. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream or vision about this statue. And what's the nice thing about this vision is that we're told exactly what this statue that's made of these different materials, what those materials represent. They represent different kingdoms. That golden head represented Babylon, and the different parts after that represented other kingdoms. But at the very end, it ended with God's kingdom, the Lord's kingdom being set up, that it was going to endure, that it was going to last forever. And so what we if you read the Bible, you understand that kingdom is set up now. It was set up during the first century. When Christ died, was buried, was resurrected. He established a new covenant, which established that new kingdom, and so that kingdom is currently in existence. And so, looking at that kingdom, and then going back and looking at this prophecy, what we can do is we can kind of piece together what this prophecy represents. What are the types of kingdoms, or what are the kingdoms to begin with that are represented in this prophecy? And so these kingdoms are important. And they're not just there just to kind of fill up space or fill up time, but they do help. I think they help at the when Christ does come. And we read in Galatians 4 and verse 4 that basically Christ came at the fullness of time, when the right time was there. So there were certain things that were set up, that were set up by these kingdoms that we'll look at here later on, that are helpful for the spread of the gospel at that time. So again, we see this vision of these different kingdoms, and it's usually it's universally understood that the beginning kingdom was Babylon, and then it goes to Persia, then the Greek kingdom, to Rome, and then finally at the end we have Christ's kingdom being set up there. And so this is kind of a chronology at the end of the Old Testament. Remember that Israel is taken captive by Syria, Judah is taken captive by Babylon, but eventually they do return, right? So around 536 BC, those of Israel, the Jews, they return. They start rebuilding. We see in 444 BC, around that time, Nehemiah rebuilds the wall, and then by 430 BC, you get to Malachi. Okay, so that's I don't know, around 430 or somewhere thereabouts, around 430 years until Christ is born, right? And so there's a lot of time between that last writing of the Old Testament and the New Testament there. And so there's nothing really said about it in the New Testament. Really, when we get to the New Testament, we just see that the Romans are in charge, and that's about it. But there was a lot of I don't know if drama is the right word, maybe it's the right word, that happens between Malachi and when Christ was born. Really, when the Romans become in charge, and so you may not be able to see this too good, but this is a timeline. This is a timeline from Bible.ca. It's a pretty useful website for if you're looking into timelines or maps or anything like that. But this kind of breaks down the time of, and of course we see here that there's a little, different dates and all, and that type of good stuff. But it's really breaking down the timeline of these Persian rulers. Some of these names you may be familiar with, like Darius and Artaxerxes. So you get around the time of Esther, thereabouts, and it starts working your way down. And if you notice the very bottom, around the year 333, you see the name Alexander the Great. And so we started at the kingdom of Babylon, all right? Eventually, Babylon is taken over by the Persians, okay? And so the Persians are in charge, but then comes along Alexander the Great. And if you paid attention in the history class when you were in school, you know about Alexander the Great, okay? So he was a Greek, and he sets up this kingdom really from Greece all the way on. I don't know if he actually went into India, but he was knocking on India's door. I mean, this was a great kingdom. If anybody got close to taking over the entire known world, it was Alexander the Great. Okay, so he conquered a great chunk of land. And really, what you see with Alexander is that culture spread throughout the region of around Israel. And what you also see is a language, so Koine Greek as well. And so during the time of the New Testament, we see that the Romans, they all, or really the common people as well, spoke Koine Greek. Okay. And so what's important about that is it's not just that the New Testament, it's written in Greek, and we have a Greek translation of the Old Testament, which is the Septuagint, but that language is a dead language, all right? And so nobody speaks Koine Greek today. And why that is useful for us is that with English, our words may change throughout time, right? So a certain word may mean something in 1900, by the year 2000, or today, it may mean something else. And so with that, and with Koine Greek being a dead language, it's useful for us in regards to translations, because what that word meant 2,000 years ago, it means today, right? And so there's not just a big issue translating that language, all right? So, we have, different words, in particular, like the word gay. We don't, what that word meant 100 years ago is not what that word meant today. With Koine Greek, we don't have that issue. So we see that Greek language, I guess, being implemented in that area during that time. And so we have this similar language that a lot of people spoke in that area. And so that would be very useful for spreading the gospel in the future. So we get to Alexander. So again, if you remember your history, Alexander dies when he's really young. And what we get to is that his empire was split into two main parts. So we have the Ptolemaic Empire and Seleucid Empire. And there's a map of this on the screen. You see that purple Ptolemaic Empire. You see, if you know your geography, you see where at the beginning it looks as though Israel is in that purple. Okay, but eventually these two empires kind of fight with one another, and eventually the Seleucids get in control of the area of Israel. Okay, and so for a period of time, things were, Israel wasn't happy, but there was I guess you would say, some tolerance towards being under the control of these empires. But all of this comes to a head when we get to Antiochus the Fourth, and this is another timeline here that there's a lot going on. But at the kind of the top, on the left hand side, you see the name of Antiochus the Fourth, and what he tried to do is he basically wanted the Jews to become good Greeks. He wanted them to adopt the Greek culture, adopt the Greek religions, and that wouldn't fly. And so what ended up happening is that we have a revolt. We have a fellow by the name of Mattathias that starts this revolt. It becomes known as the Maccabean revolt because it's the name of a family that kind of heads these things up. You see the name Judas Maccabeus there as well. And so there is this revolt for some time, and eventually the Jews do gain independence there. Okay. And so after this revolt, we have what's called the Hasmonean dynasty, which is just a lineage of Jewish kings that rule. Okay. And so they don't rule as a whole for very long. Uh, but what is interesting here is we're getting into the 100s BC, so we're getting closer and closer to Christ here. And so during this time, we have the Romans gaining power, and so there was some conflict with the Hasmoneans, and who would rule, and the drama with people fighting over who would be king, who would be in charge, that type of stuff. And so what happens, and what's very interesting here is there's a conflict between two individuals, and they decide to let Pompey, which at this time is we see here General Pompey, uh, and so he's they try to get him to help settle the conflict, and Pompey just decides that he's just going to come in and take over Jerusalem, take over Judah, and that's exactly what he does. And so we now have the Romans in charge of Jerusalem, Israel. And so that's really takes us into the New Testament. You see at the very bottom of this chart on the right hand side, 30 BC, we see Judah under Roman control. When Herod kills the last Hasmonean, which is Hyrcanus II here. Okay. So we went from the 400 BCs with Persia in control. We see Alexander, so that was around the 300s. We then takes us into the Maccabean revolt. We see it's around 160, 170 BC, and it finally takes us to the Romans officially being back in charge around 30 BC. So again, that takes us into the time of Jesus. And so there's a lot of stuff that's happening. Okay. And again, I reference Galatians 4 and verse 4 that in the fullness of time Christ comes. Remember what the Romans did and what they were good at, what they were known for. Okay. They were known for their roads, they were known for their infrastructure. Again, we have the Greek language, but with the Romans in charge and really in charge of that entire area and around that entire area around the Mediterranean Sea, we have the Roman infrastructure, we have the Roman roads, and that also allows for the gospel to spread quickly. Okay, so we have, I guess you would say, a somewhat, what's the word, homogenous culture. Of course, there were differences, but we have that Greek Roman cultures. We have this similar language, Koine Greek, and we also have the Roman infrastructure, these Roman roads that were, again, allowed for these people to really just walk and to get from place to place relatively quickly. And so that allowed the gospel to spread quickly as well. And so it fulfilled prophecy. We see that in Daniel chapter 2, but there's also some very practical and logistical advances that take place during this time that helps the word to spread, that it may not have spread so rapidly if they had not come to pass. And I think it's just a good example of God knowing what He's going to do. He knows of these kingdoms that are going to come in the future, what they are going to do, and they all have a purpose, even if these kingdoms are not godly. All right, God still uses them for purposes that even those kingdoms don't understand. But God had a plan, and it was set up to happen at the exact right time. And I think, I looked at a few examples, and I think we could find other examples of how this was just the right time for Christ to come. And so there's a lot more that you could read and study about this time. This was very, very brief, but we call these years the silent years. And the reason being that we call them the silent years, and maybe I should have said this at the very beginning, was that there was no prophets, there was no scripture being written, there was just, there was no additional word from God. But there was a lot of stuff happening. So in that case, it wasn't really silent. Okay. There was a lot of things working that were eventually working to advance God's plan in which his kingdom would be established with Jesus. And so I hope this has been useful for all of you here. If you got any questions or comments, as always, feel free to leave them. Again, my camera is not working. I hope everything's working. I'm not able to see on Facebook if it's working right. I just hope it's working right, and you can hear what I'm saying. But anyways, these videos will be posted on YouTube as always. If you miss them or you want to look at our past videos, we have them on YouTube. Our page is North Columbus Church of Christ. You subscribe to our page, you'll be notified when we upload new videos. That'd be much appreciated. And we were I was having some technical difficulties. We didn't do this for some time. I think we left off for a few weeks on doing this, but I'm gonna try to get back on the schedule. And now all we got to do now is get a camera working, and we'll be good. But until next time, I hope that you all have a good day and a good rest of the week. Thanks.